The crisp white envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hand. Through the picture window of my childhood home, I could see them all. My mother, laughing at something my father said. My brother Leo showing off his new designer watch. They were celebrating. They'd just gotten a loan approved to renovate the kitchen, a final touch on the house they were so proud of, the house my money had kept afloat for years. The doorbell chimed under my finger, a sound I hadn't made in a decade. My mother opened the door, her smile freezing on her face as she saw me. It wasn't a smile of welcome, it was the polite, strained mask she reserved for inconvenient neighbors. Behind her, my father and Leo turned, their expressions shifting from surprise to annoyance. They had no idea that the bank loan they were celebrating was a complete fiction, a trap I had set myself. The document in my hand wasn't a greeting card, it was a 30-day eviction notice. They thought I was still the broke kid they'd thrown out into the street with nothing but the clothes on my back. They didn't realize they weren't homeowners anymore, they were tenants. And I was their new landlord. You're probably wondering why I would buy the home my family lives in, only to throw them out of it. To understand that, you have to understand the price they made me pay for every single brick in this house. My story isn't about losing a house, it's about reclaiming a life. It started the day they told me my life was worth less than my brother's. I was the family's emergency fund, their workhorse, the son they kept around for parts. My brother was their prince, the one who deserved the world, even if I had to be the one to pay for it. For 20 years, I carried them on my back. I sacrificed my education, my dreams, my health. And when I finally broke, when I had nothing left to give, they didn't just abandon me. They kicked me when I was down, telling me I was a failure and a disappointment. They were wrong. My greatest failure wasn't being broke, it was believing for even a second that they ever loved me. Now their biggest mistake is about to be realizing just how much a failure can achieve when he finally stops paying for everyone else's happiness and starts investing in his own. It started subtly, the way poison seeps into the ground. When we were kids, if Leo broke a toy, I was the one who got punished for not watching him closely enough. If his grades were bad, it was because I wasn't helping him with his homework. I was the older brother, and my purpose, as my father often said, was to pave the way for Leo. I thought he meant I was supposed to be a role model. I didn't realize he meant I was supposed to be the pavement itself, the flat, hard surface for my brother to walk all over. The first time I truly understood my role, I was 16. I'd gotten my first real job, washing dishes at a local diner. I was so proud of that first paycheck. I planned to save up for a used car to finally have a little piece of freedom. When I brought the check home, my father held out his hand. "Good job, son," he said. "This goes into the family fund." The family fund was a myth, a black hole that only ever paid out in one direction. That money didn't go to bills or groceries. A week later, Leo came home with a brand new gaming console, the one all his friends had. He thanked mom and dad effusively. They beamed at him, telling him how much he deserved a break from his hard schoolwork. I stood there, my hands raw from hot water and grease, and realized my paycheck had become my brother's new toy. That became the pattern. My money, my labor, was never mine. It was a resource to be extracted. It paid for Leo's designer clothes so he could fit in with the popular kids. It paid for his school trips that I was never offered. It paid for the tutors he needed because he spent more time partying than studying. The ultimate sacrifice came when I graduated high school. I had a letter of acceptance to a state university, a chance to study engineering. It wasn't a full ride, but it was a start. It was my way out. When I showed my parents, my mother's face tightened. "That's wonderful, dear," she said, without a trace of warmth. "But how could we possibly afford that? Leo will be starting high school soon, and he needs our support. You need to be responsible. You need to keep working." My father nodded in agreement. "Your brother has so much potential. We can't let him down." They didn't ask me to delay my dream. They told me to kill it. For Leo, my future was an acceptable sacrifice for his comfort. So I stayed. I got a second job. I worked 60 hours a week. And every dollar I earned went into that house, into that family, into the myth of my brother's brilliant future. For the next 5 years, that became my life. A monotonous cycle of work, sleep, and handing over paychecks. I moved from the diner to a warehouse, then to a better paying job as a foreman at a construction company. I was a good worker, reliable, efficient, and always willing to take overtime. I had to be. I wasn't just supporting myself, I was financing my brother's prolonged adolescence. He went to college, the one I couldn't attend, with my money funding his tuition and rent. He lasted 2 semesters before dropping out, complaining that the professors didn't get him. After that came a string of brilliant business ideas. There was the t-shirt company. He spent $2,000 of my money on a printer and sold 3 shirts. The brief career as a day trader, he lost $5,000 in a week. And the plan to become a social media influencer, which involved him buying expensive camera gear and then never posting a single video. Through it all, my parents were his biggest cheerleaders. When he failed, it was never his fault. It was bad luck, a weak market, or jealous rivals. My role was simply to work harder to fund the next inevitable failure. I was paying the mortgage on the house, the insurance on their cars, and the credit card bills Leo racked up. I was an ATM with legs. I was so deep in the routine of it that I almost forgot what it felt like to have a dream of my own. The fog only broke when the construction market took a downturn. The company I worked for lost 2 major contracts in a month. Layoffs were announced, and my name was on the list. I came home that day holding a severance check that felt more like a death sentence. I sat my family down at the kitchen table, the knot in my stomach so tight I could barely speak. I lost my job today, I managed to get out. The silence that followed was not one of compassion. It was cold and sharp. My father was the first to speak, his voice laced with accusation. "What do you mean you lost your job? The property tax bill is due. How could you let this happen?" My mother wrung her hands, her eyes darting towards Leo. "But what about Leo's coding boot camp? We just paid the deposit. That was non-refundable. Your irresponsibility is going to ruin your brother's future." Leo just shook his head, looking at me with pure disgust. "Unbelievable," he scoffed. "Just when I was about to get my life on track, you pull this. You always find a way to mess things up for me." It was in that moment I finally saw the truth with perfect, horrifying clarity. They weren't worried about me. They were annoyed that their machine had broken down. My head was spinning. For years, I had been the bedrock of that family, the silent engine running in the background. Now that the engine had stalled, they were ready to scrap it for parts. "I paid the mortgage on this house for 5 years, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt before. "I paid for the food on this table. I paid for his college." I pointed a shaky finger at Leo, who just folded his arms unimpressed. My father stood up, his face red with anger. "And you lived here rent-free. We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. Don't you dare throw your contributions in our face as if we owe you something. Gratitude, that's what you owe us." It was so absurd, so twisted, that I almost laughed. They were framing their exploitation as an act of charity. They had taken everything from me, and in their minds, I was the one who was in debt. "So that's it?" I asked, looking from my mother's cold stare to my father's furious glare. "After everything I've done, you're just done with me because I lost a job?" It was my mother who delivered the final, sterile blow. She looked at me not as a son, but as a failed investment. "We can't afford to carry you right now, Alex," she said, her tone devoid of all emotion. "Leo needs our focus. He's on the cusp of something great. Your situation is a distraction. It's better if you go." Go! The word hung in the air. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. My father walked to the hall closet and pulled out an old duffel bag. He threw it on the floor in front of me. "Get your things and get out," he said. "We need to rent out your room to make up for the lost income." The cruelty was breathtaking. They weren't just kicking me out. They had a plan to replace me before my side of the bed was even cold. I walked to my room in a daze, Leo shadowing me to make sure I didn't take anything valuable. I packed a few changes of clothes, the worn-out boots from my construction job, and the acceptance letter from the university I never got to attend. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk. The front door clicked shut behind me. I looked up at the warm, glowing windows of the house I had paid for, a stranger on the outside looking in. I had $200 of severance pay in my pocket and nowhere in the world to go. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had erased me. One afternoon, sitting on a bench, I pulled out that old university acceptance letter. The paper was soft and worn from years of being folded and unfolded. It was a symbol of everything I had lost, every dream I had sacrificed on the altar of their comfort. I crumpled it into a tight ball, ready to throw it into a nearby trash can, and finally surrendered to the idea that my life was over. Alex, is that you? The voice was familiar. I looked up and saw Dave, a grizzled old electrician from my former construction site. He looked at my disheveled appearance, the duffel bag at my feet, and his friendly expression turned to one of deep concern. My God, man! What happened to you? I heard they laid you off, but this... I was too tired and broken to lie. I told him everything. About my family, my brother, about being kicked to the curb the moment the money stopped. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with every word. When I finished, he just shook his head, a look of pure disgust on his face. Kid, that ain't a family, that's a parasite. They didn't raise a son, they raised a host. He then did something my own blood had never done. He showed me basic human decency. He bought me a hot meal and told me I could crash on his couch for a few weeks. You're a hard worker, Alex. One of the best I've seen. You'll land on your feet. Don't you let those monsters win. That night, lying on Dave's lumpy couch, I couldn't sleep. His words, "Don't let them win," played over and over in my mind. For the first time in my life, someone saw me. Not my paycheck, not my utility, but me. I pulled a crumpled ball of paper from my pocket and smoothed it out on my knee. The anger I felt was different now. It wasn't the hot, helpless rage of a victim. It was cold, clear, and sharp as glass. My family had built their comfortable lives on my broken back. They thought they had buried me. They were about to find out they had only planted a seed. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to build a world so far above theirs they wouldn't even be able to comprehend it. And then, when the time was right, I would return. Dave's couch was my launch pad. I took the grueling manual labor job he helped me find and treated it like the most important career in the world. I was the first one on site and the last to leave. While other guys spent their paychecks at the bar, I saved every single dollar I could. I ate ramen noodles and bought my clothes from thrift stores. My one indulgence was a library card. Every evening after a 10-hour shift of hauling debris, I would go to the public library and teach myself. I started with business management, then moved on to software development, consuming every free online course and tutorial I could find. My body was exhausted, but my mind was on fire. My motivation was laser-focused. On my old construction job, I saw millions of dollars wasted because of one simple problem: communication. Subcontractors wouldn't get updated plans, materials would be delivered to the wrong place, and schedules would collapse, all because everyone was working off different information. The solution seemed obvious to me: a simple, rugged, easy-to-use mobile app that would sync everyone on a job site in real time. A digital blueprint that everyone could hold in their hand. With my meager savings, I hired a freelance developer to help me build a crude prototype. For 6 months, I spent every weekend visiting small construction sites, begging foremen to give my app a free trial. Most laughed in my face, but a few, tired of the same old headaches, gave it a shot. And it worked. The feedback was electric. My app was saving them time, preventing costly mistakes, and reducing paperwork. Word started to spread through the local industry. Within a year, I had enough paying clients to quit my labor job and rent a tiny, windowless office. I hired my first employee, a kid fresh out of community college who was smarter than I was, and together, we refined the software. The real breakthrough came 3 years after that night on Dave's couch. A major national construction conglomerate, a giant in the industry, was hemorrhaging money on a delayed skyscraper project. Someone in their tech division had heard about my small but highly effective software. They invited me for a presentation. I walked into their gleaming corporate boardroom in my best $100 suit and laid out my vision. 2 weeks later, they called back. They didn't just want to be a client. They wanted to license my software for their entire North American operation. The number they offered me was staggering. It had 7 zeros. That night, I sat in my small apartment and stared at my new bank balance. I wasn't just back on my feet. I was on a different planet. And the first thing I did was hire a private investigator to find out everything he could about the current financial state of a certain family living in my old neighborhood. The private investigator's report was thicker than a novel and far more compelling. I read it in my new minimalist apartment, a place so clean and quiet it felt like it belonged to someone else. The report was a detailed autopsy of my family's financial decay. It was exactly as I had suspected, only worse. After I was gone, the money tap had been turned off, but their lifestyle hadn't changed. My father had taken out a second mortgage on the house to fund another one of Leo's brilliant startups, this time a gourmet food truck that was shut down by the health department within a month. The report included photos of the truck, rotting in a tow yard. They had maxed out every credit card they had to maintain the illusion of middle-class comfort. They bought new furniture, went on a cruise, and continued to give Leo a generous allowance so he could network at expensive bars. The PI's summary was blunt. They were insolvent. Worse, they were 90 days delinquent on their mortgage payments. The bank had officially filed a notice of default. Foreclosure was no longer a risk. It was a rapidly approaching certainty. I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction settle over me. They had called me a failure, irresponsible, a drain. But the evidence was clear. I wasn't the drain. I was the plug. And the moment they pulled me, everything they had went swirling away. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I felt clarity. The next day, I met with a team of corporate lawyers. "I want to buy a mortgage," I told them, my voice steady. Anonymously. They didn't blink. For the right price, they could make me invisible. They created a shell corporation for me, a faceless LLC with a boring, forgettable name, Summit Ridge Holdings. It sounded like 1,000 other faceless companies that manage assets. Through this new entity, my lawyers approached the bank that held my family's loan. To the bank, my family's mortgage was a toxic asset, a non-performing loan they were desperate to get off their books. When Summit Ridge Holdings offered to buy the entire debt in cash, the bank practically bit their hand off. The transaction was swift and silent. A few weeks later, a file was delivered to my office. Inside was the original mortgage note, the deed of trust, and a legally binding document that transferred all rights to my corporation. I held the fate of their house, their one and only significant asset, in my hands. I instructed my lawyers to send a standard, formal letter to the residents of that address, informing them that their mortgage had been acquired by Summit Ridge Holdings and that all future correspondence should be directed to us. I imagined my parents opening that letter. They wouldn't feel fear. They would probably feel relief, thinking they had dodged the foreclosure bullet and could negotiate a new payment plan with some faceless company. They had no idea they were now tenants in a house owned by the ghost of the son they had thrown away. My instructions to the lawyers for Summit Ridge Holdings were simple. Treat them like any other delinquent account. No emotion, no special treatment, just cold, unyielding procedure. The first payment they were due to make to my company came and went. A week later, an automated letter was sent out, notifying them of their default and the addition of a significant late fee. As expected, a long, rambling letter arrived from my mother a few weeks later. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and blame-shifting. She wrote of their unfortunate string of bad luck, the unforeseen expenses related to my brother's promising career, and how a heartless corporation should show some compassion for a struggling family. Reading it, I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just the quiet satisfaction of a hypothesis being proven correct. They had learned nothing. They had taken no responsibility. In their narrative, they were still the victims. I instructed the lawyers to respond with a formal, non-negotiable repayment plan. It was a standard legal step, the kind of offer a bank would make before lowering the boom. They had 30 days to pay all arrears, and any single late payment thereafter would result in immediate foreclosure and eviction proceedings. It was a lifeline I knew they couldn't grasp. 30 days passed. No payment arrived. They had called our bluff, assuming we were just another company they could string along. My lead lawyer called me. "They're in material breach," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "We are fully authorized to file the eviction notice. I can have a court officer serve the papers by the end of the week." A court officer? An impartial stranger? That was the clean, efficient way to do it. But after everything they had done, clean and efficient felt like a cheat. It felt like letting them off easy. They had kicked me out personally, face to face. They had looked me in the eye as they cast me aside. Justice demanded symmetry. "No," I said, my voice firm. "Draw up the papers. I'll be picking them up tomorrow morning. I'll serve them myself." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Alex," my lawyer said, "I have to advise against that. It could get personal, messy." "It's already personal," I replied, and hung up the phone. The next day, a courier delivered a thick white envelope to my office. I opened it and spread the documents on my desk. The legal language was dense, but the message was simple. It was a notice to quit. It gave the current occupants, listed by name, my father, my mother, and my brother Leo, 30 days to vacate the property. I folded the papers neatly and slid them into a fresh envelope. The time for operating from the shadows was over. They had erased me from their lives, but they were about to find out that a ghost can still come back and knock on the door. And this time, I wasn't asking to be let in. I was there to kick them out. And so I stood on the doorstep, where my life had fallen apart. The paint was peeling slightly near the frame, a small sign of the decay I knew was rampant inside. I pressed the doorbell, and the familiar chime echoed, a sound from a past life. My mother opened the door, her polite party smile instantly dissolving into a mask of confused irritation. "Alex," she said, her voice flat, "what are you doing here?" From behind her, my father and Leo emerged, their faces a mixture of annoyance and morbid curiosity. "Look what the cat dragged in," Leo sneered, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Finally come back to beg for your old room? Sorry, we're thinking of turning it into a home gym." He laughed, and my father chuckled along with him. They still saw me as the punchline to a joke they'd been telling for years. I ignored them, my eyes fixed on my mother. My calmness seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. I held out the crisp, white envelope. "This is for you," I said. My father snatched it from my hand before she could take it. "If you're here looking for money, you can just turn around and leave," he grumbled, tearing it open with a flourish of impatience. He scanned the document, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this nonsense? Notice to quit?" He let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Have you finally lost your mind completely? You can't evict people from their own house." Leo peered over his shoulder and burst out laughing. "Oh, this is rich. This is the most pathetic thing you've ever done, and that's saying something." I waited for their laughter to die down, letting the silence stretch. Then I delivered the line I had been rehearsing in my mind for 5 years. "It's not your house," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "You defaulted on your loan. The bank sold your debt months ago to a private holdings company." I paused, watching their smug expressions begin to falter. "You've been living on my property. Summit Ridge Holdings, is me." The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. Leo's face went slack, the color draining from his cheeks. My father's jaw dropped, his blustering rage replaced by wide-eyed, sputtering disbelief. My mother stared at me, her hand flying to her mouth as a wave of horror washed over her features. "No," she whispered. "No, you wouldn't. We're your family." "Family?" I replied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "When you threw me out with $200 to my name, you taught me what family means. It's conditional. It's a business transaction. And you," I said, my gaze sweeping over all three of them, "are a bad investment. You're a liability. And as you once told me, you can't afford to carry dead weight. Consider this my way of cutting my losses. You have 30 days." I expected them to fight back, to get a lawyer, to make a scene. But they didn't. Instead came the flood. Dozens of voicemails and text messages a day, each one a different flavor of desperation. My mother sent long, rambling texts about my childhood, trying to remind me of good times that never existed. My father left angry, blustering voicemails, threatening me one minute and then begging me the next, appealing to a sense of familial duty he had never honored himself. Leo's messages were the most pathetic. He tried to act like we were partners, sending me texts like, "Bro, we can turn this around. You and me with your money and my ideas, we could be huge." They were like drowning people clawing at the one person who had pushed them into the water. For weeks, I ignored them, letting them stew in the consequences they had created. On the 29th day, the day before the eviction was to be enforced, I decided to answer one last call. It was my mother. Her voice was thin and reedy, stripped of all its former authority. "Alex, please," she sobbed. "Don't do this to us. We'll do anything. We made a mistake. I'm your mother. I love you." I listened to the words, and for the first time I could hear them for what they were. Not an apology, but a final, desperate attempt at manipulation. "Where was this love when you kicked me out onto the street?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Where was it when I was working 60 hours a week to pay for his dropout tuition?" Your love, your sense of family, it only exists when you need something. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about recognizing the truth. You weren't my family, you were my owners. And I quit. I hung up the phone before she could reply and blocked all their numbers. The silence that followed was the sound of my freedom. On the 30th day, they were gone. The property manager I hired told me they had left in the middle of the night, leaving behind broken furniture and bags of trash, a final, petty act of defiance. I never set foot in that house again. I had it professionally gutted, every wall stripped, every floor replaced, until no trace of my past remained. I sold it a month later. With the proceeds, I did two things. First, I paid off Dave's mortgage and bought him the best fishing boat on the market. Second, I established a perpetual scholarship at the state university for low-income students pursuing degrees in engineering, the one I never got to have. My revenge was complete. Not because I had ruined them, but because I had refused to let them ruin me. Their punishment wasn't homelessness. It was the knowledge that the failure they threw away had become more successful than they could ever imagine, and that he had used his power not just to hold them accountable, but to build a better world without them. I had finally learned that self-worth isn't given to you by family. It's something you build yourself, brick by painful brick. And my life was a skyscraper now, so tall that I no longer needed to look down to see the ruins of the past.